Welcome to DIY Easy Crafts and Berg Knifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make this American flag bald eagle themed chef's knife. Now this knife is made out of AEBL stainless steel. It's got beautiful flag scales, which the material was made by Brad Hunt, and a blade etching depicting a bald eagle embossed with the American flag. Now, this particular project started with a stainless steel knife blank, which I had water jet cut. I did, even though the water jet does produce holes, pinholes, I did ream them out with a size F drill bit, just slightly larger than 1/4 inch. I also chamfered each one of those holes. And if you notice there's some extra drill holes, I use those because it holds the epoxy a little bit better when you glue up the handles. I do most of the work on the 2x72 grinder. So what I've done here is I've used some Dykem blue, and I've scribed 2 railroad track lines on the actual edge of the blade. And I'm going to use those as a visual reference so that when I grind in on both sides of the bevel, I grind evenly to each one of those lines. Now I'm just using a 90-degree table and a 60 grit belt on the 2x72, and I use a push stick because that blade gets real hot. The first few passes I make, I just go at a kind of a sharper angle, and I bring it in, or I grind in right to those railroad track lines. After that is established, then I'm going to kind of work my way up and spread that grind out so that the whole surface of the blade is flat. This is just the rough grind, the pre-heat treating grind. And I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it or the best way to do it. All I'm showing you on this video is how I do these things. So that's the rough grind with a 60 grit belt. Now before I go to heat treating, I am going to go vertical, and I'm just using a magnetic handle. You can find those on Amazon. And I've also switched that belt. I've gone to an 80 grit belt, and I'm going to polish away all of those horizontal grind lines from the 60 grit. So this is the 60 grit rough grind, and on the other side I've smoothed out all of those lines with an 80 grit. And I'll also then bring, or at this time I'll also go down to 120 grit. After that, I'm going to go into heat treating. So this is a stainless steel knife. It gets wrapped in stainless tool wrap, and you create an envelope out of the tool wrap. You double fold, all of the sides. Really crimp those folds down tightly and make it as airtight as possible. And then it goes into a heat treating oven, 1960 degrees, for a hold time of 15 minutes. And then after it comes out of the oven, you want to cool it down as quickly as possible. I actually clamp the blade between 2 pieces of aluminum tubing to keep it nice and flat. And then I blow compressed air, not only in the gap between the tubing, but also inside each one of those tubes, just so that the blade cools down as quickly as possible. After the heat treating, that knife is now very hard, but it's also brittle. So it goes through a process of tempering, which is just in a regular kitchen oven, 395 degrees for 2 hours, and then you let it cool slowly overnight without opening the door to the oven. After that tempering is done, is what I'm doing now here, is just cleaning up, or the post-heat treat cleanup. I'm going to go back with a 120 grit belt. And start the process of just cleaning up all of the existing grind lines. And then I go from this 120, I go to a 240, and then I do some hand sanding. I usually like to get it down into the 400 range hand sanding before I do any blade etching. So for this particular knife, I had a graphic artist work out the design of the bald eagle combined with the American flag. And this was a commission build for a customer. The name Frost is actually the customer's last name. I'm going to cut this out of self-adhesive vinyl using a Silhouette Cameo vinyl cutting machine. I apply that self-adhesive vinyl to the blade, and then I go through the tedious process of weeding that vinyl. So everything that I remove is what's going to be dark. It's what's going to get etched. And any of the vinyl that's left in place, it's what's going to protect the blade from getting etched. It's a little bit of a lengthy process. You need a good set of eyes, or at the very least a good magnifying glass, a sharp set of tweezers. I'm going to use a process called Electro Etching. I'll show you that in a minute. So this is now one side completely weeded, which means I pulled off all of the pieces that expose the metal that I want etched. I'm then going to cover the back of that knife also with vinyl to protect it, and then I'm going to start to electro etch. So this is a electro etching plate. It's saturated or wrapped with gauze and saturated in a mixture of white wine vinegar and salt, and it's powered by an automotive battery charger, 2 volts, 12 volts, 2 amps. Don't get that backwards. And I'm going to etch it for a total of about 2 minutes in 10-second increments. And every minute or so, I take it off and I dunk it in water to cool it down. After the full 2 minutes, I can remove that vinyl. I'll scrape away all the self-adhesive vinyl. And now you start to get an idea of what it looks like. But that etching really doesn't look as good until you clean it with a little bit of sandpaper. So I'm going to go right back to that, I think it was a 400 grit. And then this is really the first time you can appreciate how that blade etching is going to look. So we're going to move on to the handles. I mentioned before the handle material is actually a cast urethane material. Brad Hunt made these scales. I'm a big fan of his work. He just makes some beautiful stuff. I cut out the excess material just with a bandsaw, and then I'm going to go over to the 2x72 with a coarse grit belt. This is probably a 24 or a 36, and just remove as much of that material as possible. I'm then going to go to an 80 grit, and I'm going to start to shape those handles. You have to be really careful shaping the handles, on the 2x72. You can very, very quickly scratch and ruin a blade. You just have to make sure you don't touch anywhere other than where you're supposed to touch. Using the bottom 2-inch contact wheel on the 2x72, I'm going to rough out and shape the inside curves of the handle. And then I'll go to an oscillating sander, with about a 220 grit, and then I'll go to hand sanding. And I'll sand this, 400, 600, at least 1,000 before I polish. Brad's material is very easy to work with, very easy to sand and to polish. So I usually only have to go to about 1,000 grit on his stuff. Other materials, I go to 2,000 before polishing. And then polishing is pretty simple. It's just a buffing wheel and a little bit of compound. You really bring out the luster in the handles. The final step to knife making on this particular project, or most projects, is to sharpen the blade. And a lot of knife makers fall short. If they're going to fall short anywhere, they fall short in the sharpening. I do it pretty much all of it right on the 2x72. I start with a 120 grit belt, and you want to establish that bevel so that you create a burr along the entire length of the blade. If you don't have a burr for 1 inch, you have to go back to that 120 and pass again. You're holding it at about 20 degrees. After you've got that primary or micro bevel established, you're going to change the belt. I went down to a 400 at this point. Slowed down, so I'm going half the speed, lighter grinds, but you want to establish a burr again. Each time you change belts, you want to establish that burr, and each time the burr is going to get smaller and thinner. The final belt that I use is a 2000 grit with a felt backing, and this polishes that micro bevel nicely. The very last step is a leather stroping belt, and I know some guys use this under power. I don't. I just use the 2x72 to kind of hold it against the platen, and then I just move the knife and I break away that burr, the remaining burr. It ends up with a razor sharp blade, and razor sharp for the entire length of the blade. So this is the finished product, AEBL stainless steel, so it will hold up for everyday use, won't rust. Beautiful handle material by Brad Hunt, blade etching, which depicts a bald eagle with American flag wings and my customer's name. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. By all means, check us out on the web. I've got 2 websites, DIYEasyCrafts.com. I've got a bunch of different do-it-yourself projects, and also my knife making page, which is www.bergknifemaking.com. Thank you very much for watching.